You rarely discover the truth because someone decides to tell you. Most of the time, you discover it because their actions quietly reveal what their words try to hide. A man can choose his words carefully, but he cannot completely control his behavior. His daily habits, emotional reactions, and small routines eventually expose what is happening beneath the surface. When he has recently become emotionally or physically involved with someone else, those patterns often begin changing right away. Not weeks later, not months later, almost immediately. The biggest mistake many people make is waiting for one dramatic clue or one undeniable piece of evidence. Human psychology rarely works that way. Behavior usually changes in groups. It is not one obvious sign. It is several small shifts happening together that begin telling the real story. That is when listening becomes less important than observing. Guilt changes behavior. Excitement changes behavior. Secrecy changes behavior. When all three appear at the same time, a person often starts acting differently without realizing how noticeable it has become. If you've ever sensed something was wrong before anyone admitted it, let me know in the comments by saying, "I trust my instincts." Stay with me, because what comes next explains why these subtle changes are so easy to miss. Awareness protects you from confusion, and confusion is often the reason people stay trapped in situations they should have understood much sooner. One of the earliest changes is emotional distance. This does not always appear as anger or obvious coldness. In many cases, it is quiet and almost invisible. He may still text you, answer your calls, and spend time with you, yet the emotional feeling behind those moments seems different. The warmth becomes weaker. His attention feels divided. The connection no longer feels as effortless as it once did. Emotional presence depends on mental focus, and when someone's mind is occupied by something new, exciting, stressful, or emotionally consuming, they simply cannot offer the same emotional energy they once did. He may begin keeping conversations at the surface instead of going deeper. The questions about your day become fewer. He stops showing genuine curiosity about the little details that once mattered. Long conversations slowly disappear, replaced by short replies that feel more like obligations than real interest. It begins to seem as though he is responding because he feels expected to, not because he truly enjoys talking. One of the first things to fade when attention shifts elsewhere is emotional effort. You may also notice his replies becoming slower. This is not always because he is busy. Often it reflects a change in priorities. People naturally respond faster to what captures their attention and slower to what feels routine. As emotional distance grows, communication starts feeling more like another task to complete than a conversation they genuinely look forward to. His emotional reactions may also become noticeably smaller. He laughs less, jokes less, teases less, and shows less excitement than before. The energy that once filled your conversations feels reduced because his emotional investment is being directed somewhere else. Even when he is sitting beside you, he can appear mentally absent. His body is present, but his attention seems far away. Physical distance often follows this emotional shift. He may shorten hugs, avoid lingering eye contact, choose seats slightly farther away, or leave meetings earlier than usual. None of these changes need to be dramatic to matter. In fact, they are usually very subtle. Most people notice them with their intuition long before they can explain them logically. It feels as though an invisible wall has quietly appeared between you. Something feels slightly different, even if nothing obvious has happened. That quiet feeling is exactly why emotional distance creates so much confusion. It rarely announces itself loudly. It whispers. And because people cannot immediately prove what they are sensing, they often ignore those early warning signs. Keep watching, because the next pattern is even easier to overlook. Another behavior that often appears is over-explaining. From a psychological point of view, this usually happens when someone is trying to manage the story instead of simply telling it. Honest explanations are normally short, clear, and consistent. A person tells you where they were, what happened, and then moves on. But when someone feels pressure to hide something, the brain switches into protection mode. Suddenly, every answer becomes longer than necessary. Details begin filling every empty space before you even ask another question. This happens because guilt and fear force the mind to work much harder. Instead of simply remembering events, the person is also thinking about what to include, what to leave out, how believable the story sounds, and whether every part fits together. That mental pressure often leads to talking far more than usual. The same point may be repeated several different ways. Extra information appears about people, locations, schedules, traffic, work, or small events that add nothing important to the main story. The real goal is not clarity. The goal is convincing you that nothing is wrong. Sometimes the explanation even sounds rehearsed, almost as if it has been practiced beforehand. Real memories are usually imperfect. People naturally forget small details or jump between events. But when someone is trying to protect a secret, they often present everything in perfect order, so there are no loose ends. Ironically, that polished version can feel less believable because genuine experiences rarely sound like carefully organized reports. You may also notice long explanations appearing when you never sounded suspicious in the first place. A simple question like, "How was your day?" suddenly receives a complete timeline from morning until bedtime. While this can certainly happen for innocent reasons, it can also be an attempt to appear unusually transparent. Over-explaining often comes together with subtle defensiveness. Ask one harmless follow-up question, and he immediately adds more information or becomes slightly tense, almost eager for you to stop asking. That urgency matters. Someone who is simply telling the truth rarely feels desperate to prove every sentence, but someone hiding something often wants the conversation to end quickly, hoping enough details will prevent any further questions. Most people completely miss this pattern because they focus only on the words instead of the pressure behind them. Another important behavioral shift involves eye contact and physical closeness. Looking directly into another person's eyes is one of the strongest forms of human connection. It creates openness, honesty, and emotional exposure. That is exactly why people who feel guilty or conflicted often reduce it without even realizing they are doing so. When someone is carrying an uncomfortable secret, maintaining long eye contact becomes emotionally difficult. As a result, he may spend more time looking at his phone, glancing around the room, watching television during conversations, or ending face-to-face interactions sooner than before. These changes usually appear gradually. Earlier, he may have held your gaze while listening carefully. Now he looks away more often. Before he looked directly at you while speaking. Now his eyes drift downward or towards something else. Before he appeared completely engaged. Now he seems distracted even when nothing else is happening. These are often unconscious attempts to reduce emotional discomfort because eye contact naturally increases emotional closeness. Physical affection can change for similar reasons. Hugs may become shorter, casual touches become less frequent. Sitting close may slowly disappear without any clear explanation. Affection creates emotional intimacy, and when someone feels internally conflicted, that closeness can quietly trigger feelings they would rather avoid. Instead of openly discussing what they are experiencing, they may unconsciously create a little more space between you. The change is rarely dramatic, which is exactly why it is so easy to overlook. But when several of these small behaviors begin appearing together, they deserve careful attention. What happens next may surprise you, because the following pattern is often the one that reveals more than words ever could. He may begin sitting a little farther away, keeping your time together shorter, avoiding long hugs, or quietly stepping away from situations where the two of you would normally stay physically close for a while. It is not always obvious or cold. In fact, most of the time it feels very subtle, almost like the level of physical comfort has quietly shifted. Interestingly, the opposite can happen too. Rather than pulling away physically, he may suddenly become much more affectionate than before. The difference is that the affection feels different. It feels rushed, less heartfelt, almost as if he is trying to perform closeness instead of naturally feeling it. This sometimes happens when guilt pushes someone to overcompensate. They become extra loving because they hope you will not notice the changes happening underneath the surface. The important thing to remember is that eye contact and physical closeness are guided far more by emotions than by spoken words. Someone can carefully choose what they say, but it is much harder to hide what their body naturally communicates. That is why shifts in eye contact, body language, personal space, and physical affection often reveal emotional reality long before words ever do. Stay with me because the next behavior catches many people completely off guard. Sometimes the biggest clues are not found in what someone says. They appear in the way they suddenly start treating you. A man carrying emotional pressure often reacts in one of two very different ways. He either becomes unusually kind or unexpectedly irritated. Both reactions can come from the same inner conflict, even though they look completely different on the outside. When guilt builds inside someone, they sometimes try to reduce it by becoming extra thoughtful, extra caring, and more attentive than usual. This is not always planned. Very often it happens without conscious awareness because doing more positive things temporarily eases uncomfortable feelings. Suddenly he gives more compliments, answers your messages quicker, offers help more often, surprises you with small gifts, or becomes more romantic than he normally is. The important detail is not that he is being nice. It is that the level of kindness feels very different from his normal personality. A sudden shift is often more meaningful than the behavior itself. Other people respond in the opposite direction. Instead of becoming sweeter, they become impatient, defensive, and irritated over things that never bothered them before. Internal stress has a way of leaking into everyday interactions. Small conversations become arguments. Simple questions sound like accusations. Normal discussions suddenly feel tense. This happens because hiding something keeps the mind constantly alert. When people remain psychologically on edge, they react faster and with stronger emotions. Sometimes conflict itself becomes useful because conflict creates distance. Distance temporarily reduces feelings of guilt. That is why certain arguments are never really about the small issue being discussed. They become a way of creating emotional space. One day he may seem incredibly loving. The next day he seems frustrated by everything. These emotional swings are rarely random. They often reflect an internal struggle that quietly affects everything happening on the outside. Keep watching, because the next pattern is one that people notice almost immediately. One of the clearest behavioral shifts today involves phone habits, because so much of modern communication happens through a device that is always within reach. When those habits suddenly change, it often means something in his digital life has changed as well. The key word is suddenly. If he has always valued privacy with his phone, that is simply part of who he is. But if he once seemed completely relaxed and then unexpectedly becomes extremely protective without any obvious reason, that change deserves attention. You may notice his phone is always placed face down even though it never used to be. Earlier he left it anywhere without concern. Now every notification is hidden from view almost automatically. Sometimes he quickly flips it over the moment a message arrives. This reaction often happens before he even realizes he is doing it because protecting information becomes an unconscious habit. Another change is taking the phone everywhere. Even a short trip to the kitchen, the bathroom, or another room suddenly includes carrying the phone. The device rarely leaves his hands because controlling the phone means controlling whatever information is inside it. Notification sounds may disappear, message previews might be turned off, new passwords, fingerprint locks, or app locks appear where none existed before. Again, privacy itself is not the issue. The sudden difference is what matters. You might also notice that whenever you walk near him while he is using his phone, he quickly switches apps, locks the screen, tilts it away, or becomes slightly tense. These reactions usually happen in a split second because they are driven more by instinct than planning. Another interesting clue is that he appears active online throughout the day, yet your messages receive slower replies than before. Somehow there is always time to use the phone, but less time to respond to you. That difference between overall phone activity and communication with you often reveals where attention has quietly shifted. Daily routines can also change in ways that seem small at first, but become meaningful over time. Most people naturally develop predictable habits. They wake up around the same hour, eat meals on a familiar schedule, work similar hours, and usually spend their free time in fairly consistent ways. When those patterns suddenly shift without a clear explanation, it often means something new has entered their life that now requires time, energy, and attention. The important detail is not simply that routines change because life does become busy. The important part is when the changes appear suddenly and are followed by vague explanations that never fully answer your questions. One of the earliest clues is the appearance of new unavailable periods. Certain evenings, certain afternoons, or specific weekends suddenly become off limits again and again. When you ask what he is doing, the answers remain broad. He says work, helping someone, meeting people, or simply being busy, yet very little detail follows. When people have nothing to hide, they usually explain genuine schedule changes naturally and consistently. Another noticeable shift involves communication timing. Maybe he always called after work, but now evenings are suddenly unavailable. Maybe late-night conversations disappear because he now claims to sleep much earlier. Small changes like these often reveal changing priorities. New activities may also appear from nowhere. Suddenly there is a different gym schedule, a new project, unfamiliar friends, fresh hobbies, or regular visits to places he never mentioned before. None of these things automatically mean something is wrong on their own, but when several of these changes begin appearing together while emotional distance, over-explaining, mood swings, and phone habits also shift, the overall pattern becomes much harder to ignore. Most people focus on individual behaviors. The real answers often appear only when you step back and see how every small piece quietly connects to the next. Of course, any one of these routine changes can be completely normal on its own. Life changes, work becomes busy, new responsibilities appear, but when several new routines begin showing up all at once, it often suggests that his daily life has been reorganized to make room for something new. Another clue is inconsistency in his availability. Some days he seems completely relaxed, available, and eager to spend time with you. Then suddenly there are days when he cannot be reached at all, and the pattern does not seem to fit with his normal responsibilities. That inconsistency can happen when someone is trying to balance two different schedules without allowing them to overlap. Daily routines are one of the strongest behavioral indicators because habits are difficult to change without a meaningful reason. People rarely reshape their everyday patterns unless something important requires them to do so. Stay with me, because the next sign is even more revealing. It is one that many people feel before they are ever able to explain it. One of the clearest changes is when he seems mentally somewhere else, even while sitting right beside you. Being present is not simply about sharing the same space. It is about where his attention truly is. When someone is fully engaged, they listen carefully, respond naturally, and react to what you are saying in real time. But when their thoughts are divided between different emotional priorities, their level of engagement quietly drops. The change is usually subtle, yet it becomes consistent enough that you eventually begin to notice it. One of the easiest signs to recognize is that he starts missing details that he normally would have remembered. You tell him something important, and later he asks about it as though the conversation never happened. This does not always mean he has stopped caring. Often it means his mind was occupied elsewhere while you were speaking, so the information never fully settled in his memory. Another common pattern involves delayed or mismatched responses. You may share something meaningful, but his reaction feels slow, generic, or disconnected from what you actually said. It can seem as though he is answering automatically instead of truly understanding the conversation. This happens because divided attention only allows someone to respond at the surface level instead of connecting emotionally. Over time, you may notice him drifting during conversations. His eyes wander around the room. He reaches for his phone more often, or he seems lost in thought while you are still talking. Even if he makes an effort to stay involved, the lack of consistent focus slowly becomes obvious. It creates the uncomfortable feeling that you are speaking without being fully heard. Curiosity also begins fading. When someone is emotionally invested, they naturally ask follow-up questions, remember little details, and genuinely want to know more. But when their attention is elsewhere, that curiosity quietly disappears. Conversations become more one-sided because they stop exploring what you are sharing. The discussion continues, yet it feels practical instead of meaningful. Emotional connection requires attention, and attention cannot fully exist in two different places at the same time. Mental distraction is often one of the earliest internal changes because attention almost always shifts before behavior becomes impossible to ignore. Most people completely overlook this stage because it feels so subtle in the beginning. Another pattern that often appears is creating unnecessary conflict to produce emotional distance. When someone feels internally conflicted or is carrying guilt, emotional closeness can become uncomfortable because closeness increases the chance of difficult conversations, uncomfortable questions, or being emotionally understood. Rather than facing those feelings directly, he may unconsciously create tension through small disagreements. These arguments are rarely about the actual topic. Instead, they quietly change the emotional atmosphere. You may notice that things which never mattered before suddenly become reasons for frustration. A harmless comment, an ordinary question, or a simple expectation unexpectedly turns into a disagreement. The intensity often feels much greater than the situation itself deserves because the real emotion is coming from somewhere deeper. The disagreement simply becomes a release valve for pressure that has been building internally. After these arguments, another pattern often appears. Communication becomes colder, replies become shorter, contact slows down for a while. That emotional distance is not always intentional, yet it serves a purpose. Greater distance temporarily reduces emotional pressure, making it easier for him to manage uncomfortable feelings. You may also notice stronger defensiveness. Even neutral observations are interpreted as criticism. Questions that once felt normal suddenly sound like accusations. When someone feels psychologically on edge, their tolerance becomes much lower, so they react more quickly and much more emotionally than before. Sometimes old disagreements that were already settled are suddenly brought back into the conversation. This shifts attention away from the present and creates another reason for emotional separation. These conflicts often leave you feeling confused because they seem disconnected from what actually happened. One minute, everything feels peaceful. The next minute, there is tension over something insignificant. Over time, that unpredictability creates an unstable emotional environment where closeness never feels completely secure. What happens next may surprise you because the final behavior often changes the entire relationship dynamic. A sudden increase in the need for privacy and independence can also become an important behavioral shift, especially when it feels very different from the way he behaved before. Every healthy relationship includes personal space, and everyone deserves privacy. The important point is not privacy itself, it is the sudden increase in the desire for it. When this shift appears without any major life event to explain it, it sometimes reflects new conversations, new activities, or new parts of life that someone prefers to keep hidden. You may begin hearing statements such as, "I need more space," "I don't like being questioned," "I want more independence," or "I shouldn't have to explain everything." By themselves, these statements are not unhealthy. The key is their timing. If they appear suddenly without a clear reason, they can become a way of creating a protective boundary around parts of life that were previously open. Questions that once felt ordinary suddenly feel uncomfortable because someone carrying a secret often experiences even normal curiosity as pressure. Instead of answering openly, the focus shifts toward changing the rules of the relationship. The conversation moves away from explaining behavior and towards suggesting that there are too many questions or too much control. This quietly redirects attention away from his actions while giving him greater freedom and less accountability. You may also notice that certain parts of his daily life slowly disappear from conversation. Friends are mentioned less, places are no longer discussed, daily plans become vague, questions receive short replies like "just work," "just meeting people," or "nothing important," without the natural details that emotionally open people usually share. There can also be a gradual change in mindset. He begins talking much more about independence than togetherness, emphasizing personal freedom, personal space, and doing things on his own. None of those ideas are unhealthy by themselves, but when they appear suddenly and become much stronger than before, they can sometimes reflect an effort to create greater separation. The less visible everyday life becomes, the easier it is to keep certain parts of it completely out of view.